down to 10% on December 31st, 2016. So the largest, 16, the largest and most powerful force of the federal government to date, prior to the EPA rules, had been the expansion of the ITC. That has been in place since the stimulus bill of 2009. That's set to retire or to reduce. And the notion there is that the market should mature enough and cost structure should mature enough till we get to a point where we can sustain ourselves with the 10%. All right, I'm going to hopefully get through these next ones because this is where the real juice is. So you've all heard of the net metering debate. I'm not going to bore you with the intricate details of what's being fought over. But net metering, the basic concept is that your meter spins forward and backwards at the same rate per kilowatt hour. For every kilowatt hour that you consume, your meter spins backward 1 unit. For the same unit of production, 1 kilowatt hour, it would spin the other way at the same rate. And net metering refers to the fact that you can bank that excess production on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And in Excel territory at least, there's an annual, you can bank that for a year. That credit that you have produced, that you have invested in, is yours for a period of a year. I'm under recent advice and knowledge that today Fort Collins utility customers received an update that the net metering rules here in Fort Collins utility have changed. You all also had annual net metering that has now changed to monthly net metering. Is that right? Okay. We can go into that in a bit. Once you understand perhaps why some of this has taken place. Important to note there are 23 states with net metering policies, and I think that ALEC is attacking 19 or 20 of them. So what's the problem with one-for-one credit over the course of a year? It's a really long story. It's complicated, and I'm going to give it to you in 2 slides. The debate surrounds really, really boring, complex, dry rate-making issues. The fact is that there are inherent incentives and disincentives, things that we're not even aware of, that are embedded in net metering policy that cause some rate-making complications. The notion that we have to set arbitrary lines when we set rates for a residential customer, a commercial customer, an industrial customer, in terms of what their connection fee is, what their per kilowatt hour charge is, and how we're going to pay the utility back for all of their investments and all of their expenses. The utility claims there's a cross-subsidization problem, that net metering provides a benefit for the net metered customer, but not the person who's not net metered, that they are left having to pay back the investments that the utility made. So this notion that the last person in the line will be the one holding the conceptual bag of coal. There are ways around that. It's a very crude metaphor, but that's one of the things the utility laments about. Another is that there's interclass rate issues, allocating the costs and benefits of distributed generation solar between res, non-res industrial customers. There's this notion of rough justice, which is that if the utility and other customers are not made whole by virtue of residential net metering, they definitely are when you look on the other side at commercial net metering. There's a lot of backstory to what that means, but the notion is that when you look at the whole picture, everyone is roughly being made whole under the current net metering structure. There's a fight about what the quantifiable numbers are when you put numbers to the costs and benefits of different components of the system. Then there are the qualitative ones. What is the carbon price? What is the cost to human health? What is the benefit to a customer being able to choose between a carbon-intensive fuel source and a solar rooftop system? I'm going to skip down to the duck curve because the duck curve is something everybody really can enjoy. You love it? So the duck curve this is something that the ISO, the Integrated Systems systems operator, I think it's called, in California is really worried about, because the thought is that when we have extremely high levels of solar PV penetration and we look at the daily load curve for a system, independent system operator, we see these gross distortions, which is as solar PV comes online, it erodes the need for base load capacity. And it happens very quickly. And again, those lines show years of basically increasing PV penetration. So we get into the solar noon hour when PV is rocking and rolling. Base load has to be turned off or reduced. That costs money to try to ramp down a nuclear or coal plant. In Germany, for instance, wholesale prices go negative. That means that there is so much distributed generation happening on their system that the utilities, for every kilowatt hour they deliver to the grid, they're losing money on their nuclear, coal, and natural gas production. They go negative. And then they run into a problem when PV peaks and then starts to retreat, and then people turn on their air conditioners, and that causes, again, a disruption to the grid. They have to basically not rely on baseload capacity, but now they've got to ramp up their peakers really quickly. And that costs money, and they're saying that they're not being made whole for that investment. All right. Some people have asked about the value of solar tariff. Well, I'm not going to give you a value of solar tariff 101. If you're interested in that, there's an expert. His name is Carl Rabago. He now lives in Denver, and he was the author. He created the value of solar tariff. He was a regulator and a utility executive at Austin Energy. He co-wrote the value of solar tariff bill in Minnesota. This is a proxy for net metering, is what it boils down to. It is a preset methodology that arrives at an all-in price of solar. Some people have called it a buy-all, sell-all. Some people have said that it's very similar to a feed-in tariff. It has subtle differences, but basically it's a regulatorily set price for PV production. Rather than net metering, which is one-for-one credit, you buy all your power at the retail rate, you sell all your PV power at this value of solar tariff. Ultimately, what we need to start looking at are things that the Fort Collins utility has investigated and has adopted. Smart rates. You guys have summer rates and tiered rates. We need to look at inverted block pricing, similar to a lot of water utilities. So the more you buy, those higher bands of usage cost more per unit. We need to look at time of use pricing, and we need to look at values-based pricing. The bottom line, these are some of my predictions. The bottom line is that any methodology for valuing solar generation on a system, on a grid, we need to move away from cost-based methodologies, which is what the utilities have relied on for 120 years, to value-based methodologies, which is what is the value of the resource to different stakeholders, to the utility, to the system, to you, the ratepayer, to your neighbor, the non-participating ratepayer, and not what is the cheapest cost to deliver a unit of electricity to you. We need to look at dynamic, decentralized, and democratized generation and delivery systems. That is, we need to empower consumers with options and set appropriate signals to encourage the kind of behavior that we want. And we need those prices to be dynamic and to flow in both directions. We need to stop thinking of ratepayers as people who pay rates and get a bill every month, and think of them as customers to whom we deliver value and offer a value proposition, or prosumers, market participants that we engage, incentivize, and interact with through intelligent pricing. We need regulatory reform. There's a model that's come out of the UK called the RIO, again, an acronym that I couldn't tell you what it means right now. But basically, they've adopted performance-based regulation, which is it's no longer just enough to deliver the least cost energy to ratepayers. That was the 1970s. What they're looking at is setting the rate of return for utility investments based on their performance relative to preset goals that aren't just cheap, safe, and available all the time. That has to include decarbonization, consumer choice. It has to, again, be dynamic and encourage market behavior that's in the best interest of the system and other stated qualitative goals. And based on their performance, their rate of return will change. We're starting to see more push for that in the US. Prosumer utilities are absolutely the future. The largest utility in Germany, RWE, is the second largest in all of Europe, just announced a tectonic shift away from being a central power plant owner, cost-based, volume-based revenue generator, to a prosumer-based utility. They announced in quotes that they are going to become an energy services provider to enable their customers to interact with them and provide value to the system. Distributed storage. Once we see distributed storage paired with distributed generation, I believe it is game over for the owners of vertically integrated utilities. It will truly be the last people on their grid holding the bag for all of those assets. When those two things can be economically paired and people can go off the grid en masse, we will see true disruption. I believe that these new financing options are both a sign and are a sign of innovation and a signal that more innovation is yet to come. And it's interesting the areas where we're seeing innovation. Finance products. This is an area where Wall Street has long been active but has not paid a lot of attention to the clean tech sector. In the last 5 years, we've seen more innovation and more activity than ever before. And in fact, the big Wall Street banks are starting to look at the conventional utilities and essentially lower their rating and assign greater risk values to their business model as these new financing products enable more people to go solar. That was our journey around the globe. We looked at lots of different aspects of solar policy, and before you all go for round 2, I wanted to open up for questions, discussion, and feel free to interact as well. This doesn't have to just be directed toward me. I see a question right here. We'll go